Welcome to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Chris Towers here with Dan Schneier. We're going to talk about all of Thursday's COVID news that you need to know about. We're up to over 120 players in the NFL, over 6% of the population of the NFL right now on active rosters on the COVID list. We're going to talk a little bit about Thursday night's game between the Chiefs and the Chargers and some start-sit questions for Week 5. There are so many moving pieces right now in fantasy football that it's really, really hard for us to do start-sit questions right now. So we're going to do some this player or this player if something else happens. That's just kind of the situation that we're facing. But first, let's talk about the players added to the COVID list on Thursday. And there were updates to the league's COVID protocols that made it so that if vaccinated players test negative once, they can come back from the COVID list. So that does increase the odds that some of these players who went on the list this week will be back. But obviously, who that might impact, we won't know until, at least 24 hours before the game. So something to keep in mind there. But Jalen Waddle and Tyler Lockett were the biggest names added to the COVID list on Thursday. At this point, you have to assume those guys aren't going to play. What do you think that does for Devontae Parker in particular? We'll actually be talking about DK Metcalf a little later, but Devontae Parker, how high does this move him up in the rankings for you?
It moves him in squarely into the wide receiver 2 range for me. I think he's going to be a volume dependent wide receiver 2, but that volume will be there. That's a heavy RPO system. Nobody runs more RPOs right now than the Dolphins. So there's going to be a lot of easy pitch and catch opportunities. It may not look too pretty, but if you're in a PPR or half PPR league, you can lock him in as a wide receiver 2, I think.
And it's the Jets. Are you still starting to in Tagovailoa?
I am still starting to. I still like to a lot as a streamer this week.
That makes sense. What about Russell Wilson? Does the likely absence of Tyler Lockett change how you view him? For me, he was like quarterback 12 before this.
It does a little bit change how I view him. I know he's been on lately. He's had a couple back-to-back fantasy relevant games, but Lockett's his big play guy down the field. Yeah. So taking him out of the system and taking him off the field does hurt them. I'd probably put him a little outside that QB1 range for me.
All right, and then some of the other names that were added to the list include fantasy relevant names, at least Alex Collins, Allen Robinson, and Browns quarterback Case Keenum. You probably remember that Baker Mayfield, the other Browns quarterback, the starting quarterback for the Browns, is also on the COVID list. So that leaves the Browns down to Nick Mullens as their likely starter for Saturday's game against the Raiders. I think Nick Chubb's likely going to have a huge workload. I think Dearness Johnson could get enough work to be a viable starter. I was sort of interested in Donovan Peoples-Jones and David Njoku, but it's going to be really tough to trust them if they're down to their third quarterback, especially they've got 2 of their starting offensive linemen on the COVID list as well. So it could be a real tough situation for the Browns offense. All right, let's move on to the Thursday game, and the Chargers kind of blew it. The Chiefs came back with a touchdown late in the fourth quarter and then a beautiful Travis Kelce catch and run where he basically outrun the entire Chargers defense for the win. He ended up with a career-high 191 yards. It was the 12th best PPR scoring game for a tight end of all time. Tyreek Hill also had over 120 yards and a touchdown. Patrick Mahomes, I said on yesterday's podcast that under 2.5 touchdowns was the right call for Patrick Mahomes. And it looked really good until about midway through the fourth quarter. Do you trust all of them rest of the season?
I definitely do. And Travis Kelce truthers like myself were really pleased to see this type of game because we've taken a lot of heat. We were taking a lot of heat for our Kelce first round strategy this week. And you know what? Now he comes through with a massive playoff game and reinserts this. Listen, I am the tight end 1, okay? Mark Andrews, move over. It's me. Yeah. And so I was excited, and I trust them the rest of the season. The only one, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he didn't come back to the workload I expected.
Yep.
He returned, and again, still just not he was supposed to be billed as Andy Reid's next Brian Westbrook, and yet he very rarely uses him in the passing game.
Very rarely uses him near the goal line either. We saw Darrell Williams come in and get a goal line carry. Clyde Edwards-Helaire did get a 2-point conversion to kind of boost his game up a little bit, but right around 7 PPR points for him this week. That's just not very good at all. And for the Chargers, Justin Jackson rushed 13 times for 86 yards, while Austin Ekeler had just 12 carries. He did get into the end zone, so it wasn't a bad fantasy game. Do you think that might be a timeshare moving forward?
Not at all for me. I think even the Chargers realized when they put Ekeler back in after the fumble, then the interception, then they got the ball back in the red zone, and Ekeler scored. Ekeler's the best run. I just think it was more injury-based for tonight.
I think that's probably fair. Let's move on to some start-sit calls for Week 15 for the NFC games. If you want to hear more, make sure you listen to the full episode of the Fantasy Football Today podcast because they're going to be talking about every NFC home game on that pod. Plus, they went over all the AFC home games on Thursday. So make sure you check that out. Let's start with DK Metcalf or Van Jefferson. We've got Odell Beckham on the COVID list. We've got Tyler Lockett on the COVID list. DK Metcalf really struggling. Who would you rather start there?
Yeah, let's just assume both those stay on the top on the COVID list. Regardless, though, I think I'm putting out DK Metcalf. I'm going to roll him out. I don't want to miss the 2-touchdown explosion game, and if Lockett isn't there, I think a big game will be coming.
All right, let's do a little three-way on this next one. There's a lot of moving pieces on this one, so stay with me. Saquon Barkley, who was back at practice today with that ankle injury, or Ronald Jones if Leonard Fournette is out. He has yet to practice this week because of an ankle injury. Or Chase Edmonds, who's expected to come back from IR if James Conner is out. He's yet to practice with an ankle injury as well.
That's a great one. I actually like Barkley more than you would expect here, but he won't be my pick just because the Giants have been making a concerted effort to get him involved in the passing game since Freddie Kitchens took over as the play caller. But I actually weirdly think I'm rolling Edmonds here. I love the match if Connor's out. Love the matchup.
It's against the Lions.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all you have to say.
Love the matchup, love the game script. That's all you need to say. Exactly.
All right, one more, and this is another one that's contingent. Rashad Penny, starter for the Seattle Seahawks, or Miles Sanders, assuming he plays, coming back from that ankle injury. He's been limited so far this week.
Well, I pause for a second because I look up how many Washington football team players are on the COVID list. I think
19.
Number is at 19. It's just like, can you even feel the defense?
And it's heavily weighted towards the defense, and especially the front seven.
I know. So I'm like, with that in mind, I almost want to go Sanders, but I'm going to stick with Penny. I think the Seattle's more committed to the run game, and I think they found something with Penny last week.
All right, that's going to do it for Fantasy Football Today in 5. We'll see you tomorrow, and for more on the start sit calls, make sure you listen to the full episode of Fantasy Football Today. We'll see you.